There is something nobody talks about. A weight so familiar you stopped noticing it was there. You carry it every day. In the way you say yes when you mean no. In the guilt that rises when you put yourself first. In the exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much sleep you got last night. And here is what most people never find out. That weight, it was never yours to carry in the first place. Stay with me. Because by the end of this video, you are going to understand something that could change the way you have seen yourself for decades. The most important part comes near the end, and if you leave early, you will miss the piece that makes everything else make sense. Now, Carl Jung spent his entire life studying the hidden architecture of the human mind. And one of the most profound things he discovered was this, that most people are not living their own lives. They are living the unlived lives of the people who raised them. They are carrying emotions that were never processed by the generations before them. They are holding grief, shame, fear, and obligation that seeped into them before they even had words to describe what they were feeling. Think about it. A child does not choose what it absorbs. A child simply absorbs. And somewhere along the way, that child grew into you, and you are still carrying it. Jung called this the shadow, the accumulated weight of everything we were taught to suppress, deny, or feel responsible for. But there is another layer to this, a layer that goes even deeper, and it involves something Jung identified as the family psyche, the invisible emotional inheritance passed silently from one generation to the next. Here is what I mean. Have you ever felt guilty for no clear reason? Have you ever felt responsible for keeping the peace in a room full of adults, even when you were just a child? Have you ever shaped your whole personality around what others needed from you, and forgotten to ask what you needed? Sound familiar? That is not a character flaw. That is a wound, and it has a name. Psychologists who built on Jung's work, like Alice Miller, called it the weight of the adapted child, the version of yourself that learned to survive by becoming what your environment demanded, not who you truly were, but who you needed to be to feel safe, loved, and accepted. And here is the difficult truth. That adaptation saved you then. It genuinely did. But if you are still carrying it now, decades later, it is no longer saving you. It is shrinking you. Let that sink in. Now, the first step to setting this weight down, and Jung was very clear about this, is recognizing that you took it on in the first place, not out of weakness, but out of love, out of loyalty, out of survival. You absorbed it because you were connected to people who needed you to. Children are extraordinarily sensitive to the emotional undercurrents of their families. Research in developmental psychology confirms what Jung intuited a century ago, that children can sense unspoken tension, unresolved grief, and suppressed anxiety in their caregivers, and they will unconsciously organize their behavior around it. So the child who became the peacemaker, the one who learned to disappear when things got tense, the one who carried a parent's sadness without understanding why they always felt so heavy, that child was not broken. That child was responding with perfect logic to an imperfect situation. But now you are not that child anymore. Stay with me here. Because this next part is where everything starts to shift. Jung believed that the path to wholeness, what he called individuation, required a person to go back, not to relive the pain, but to recognize what truly belonged to them and what did not. He wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Read that again slowly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That quiet voice that says you are too much. That reflexive apology that comes before you have even done anything wrong. That lifelong habit of making yourself smaller in rooms where you deserve to take up space. These did not come from nowhere. They were handed to you. Carefully, quietly, and with no instruction manual on how to give them back. And listen, this is not about blame. Jung himself was deeply opposed to the idea of spending a life in blame, because blame keeps the weight exactly where it is. Blame just transfers the burden from your own hands to a story you carry about someone else, and that is still carrying. The real work, the Jungian work, is recognition. It is standing in front of your own life and asking, which parts of this are actually mine? Which emotions are mine? Which fears are mine? Which beliefs about my worth, my place, my right to exist joyfully? Which of those are genuinely mine? Because some of them are. And those are worth examining with honesty and compassion. But some of them are not yours at all. They belong to people who have been gone for years, or decades, or maybe generations. They are echoes, and you have been mistaking those echoes for your own voice. This is where it gets powerful. When you begin to identify the weight that was never yours, something remarkable happens. You do not just feel lighter. You start to feel more yourself. The real self that was always underneath, the one that got buried under layers of adaptation and obligation, begins to surface. Slowly, sometimes uncomfortably, but undeniably. Jung called this the emergence of the self with a capital S. Not the small, conditioned, socially constructed self that learned to survive, but the deeper, truer self that has always known exactly who it is and what it needs. And for many people, this emergence does not happen until later in life. Jung actually believed the second half of life was the most spiritually significant, because it is often the first time a person has both the courage and the perspective to ask, who am I, really, beneath everything I was taught to be? If you are watching this and you are in that season of life, this is your invitation. Not to tear everything down, not to rage against the past, but to gently, with the compassion you would offer any person who carried too much for too long, begin to sort through what is yours and what was borrowed. Some tools that Jungian therapists and depth psychologists recommend for this process include journaling, not the kind where you recount events, but the kind where you ask your own emotions questions and listen for honest answers. Dream work is another entry point Jung championed deeply, because the unconscious speaks most freely when the conscious mind steps aside. And simply sitting with the discomfort of asking yourself, what would I feel, believe, or do if I were not afraid of disappointing anyone? That last question. Hold it for a moment. I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to know your answer. Have you ever had that moment where you realized you had been living by a rule, an unspoken rule, that was placed in you by someone else, and you had never once questioned it? If that has ever happened to you, share your story in the comments below. You would be surprised how many people are carrying exactly the same thing and feeling completely alone in it. Because here is the final thing Jung wanted us to understand. You are not broken for having carried this. You are not weak. You are not damaged. You are a human being who loved and survived and adapted, and now you are awake enough to ask a different question. The weight was never yours, and you are allowed to set it down, not all at once, not without effort, but with intention, with honesty, and with the deep respect for yourself that you have probably been offering to everyone else your whole life. New videos drop every day on Carl Jung Psychology Hub. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss one.